Hello, everyone. My name is Brian Sturm, and I am the Associate Dean for Academic Affairs. That's a new role that I've just taken on, and I'm excited to learn the ropes and get through the initial challenges and have it become a little more normal in my life. At the moment, it's quite a challenge, but a good one. I'm also a professor here at SILS, and I am, as you can see from my backdrop behind me, if you can read it, it says Story Squad on it. I'll tell you a little bit more about that in a moment. But let me introduce myself and let you know how I got to be where I am. I think I found that a lot of people who end up in information and library science, a lot of them sort of wander here. They don't necessarily start out with this career in mind, and then they discover it somewhere along the way and they realize, wow, this is the best possible fit for me. And so they end up getting the degree. And that's actually the case for me, because when I got my undergraduate degree, I had majored in French and minored in biology. And I did that because I got my undergraduate degree at William and Mary in Virginia. And in Norfolk, Virginia, or Norfolk, as they say, the locals say, there was the Jacques Cousteau Society, and I wanted to be an oceanographer. And so I got trained as a diver, and Ray, I didn't realize that you were also a diver, so there's something else that connects us. I've done some diving in New Zealand and Australia and the Caribbean as well, so we'll have to compare notes at some point. But I decided I wanted to be an oceanographer, so I majored in French, minored in biology, went down to the Cousteau Society and introduced myself and said, I'm ready for a job. I've just graduated as an undergrad. And they looked at me and they said, do you have a PhD? And I said, no. And they said, well, go get one in oceanography and then come back and talk to us. Well, I didn't want a PhD at that point. So I went out to California and I got a job as an outdoor educator. And I was working in one of the most beautiful places in the world. It was in the coastal redwood forests among these massive 100, 200 foot tall trees. And I lived on site, and the kids would come up, 5th and 6th graders would come up to the San Francisco YMCA camp where we worked, and they would spend a week with us in the camp, and we would take them out on nature trails and teach them about the edible wild plants and survival skills and all sorts of wonderful things, ecology and whatnot. And I was taking them out on these trails, and I was doing, 3 hikes a day, 4 hikes a day, some of them out in underneath the stars at night. And I got really frustrated with being the teacher there, because I found that the students, as soon as I would identify something as, that's a particular kind of slug or that's a particular kind of tree, as soon as they had a label, they lost interest in what I was trying to teach them. And so I thought, there's got to be a better way to teach this stuff. And what I ended up doing was I began learning to tell stories. And I learned the stories of the Native Americans from that region. And I began to tell those to the students. And it was amazing because when they heard a story, not only did they listen more carefully, but they remembered for a much longer time. And so sometimes 6 months later, I would see these students again, and they would say, oh, hey, Brian, I remember that story you told me. They didn't remember any of the science that I told them, but they did remember the stories. And I thought, that's really fascinating. So then I came back to the East Coast after that job ended, and I was looking for a similar kind of outdoor education position. And I couldn't find one. And I was living in Rhode Island at that point, and I saw an advertisement in the newspaper for a children's librarian. So I applied for it, and I was given the position. And I worked as a children's librarian for about 9 months and absolutely loved it. I was working with children, and I adore children. I was working with books, and I loved them too. And I thought, this is the life for me. I want to do this for the rest of my life. I'm having so much fun. I got to tell a few stories, read them aloud. And so I thought, well, I can just stay here and do this, or I can go back and get my master's degree and double my salary. So you can guess what I did. I went back and applied to a variety of universities and was accepted at Indiana University. And so I got my master's there. And while I was there, one of the courses that was offered was a storytelling class. And so I took that, and it was absolutely fascinating because, again, I found that as soon as you started a story with something like once upon a time, there was this change that came over the listeners. And I got so intrigued by it that I thought, I've got to figure out what this is. And so I decided to stay on and get a doctorate instead of going back into children's librarianship. And I got my doctorate in information and library science at Indiana University. And my doctorate was on the entrancing power of storytelling. And that led me to an academic career. And when I got my degree, I came to UNC, and I've been here now coming on 22 years, 23 years. I'm starting to lose count. But it's a wonderful place to work. It's a wonderful place to study. And I welcome you all, and I look forward to meeting you, however, whether it's virtually or in person eventually. My teaching areas are predominantly in youth services. I do teach a couple of the core courses as well. But most of my classroom teaching is in children's literature, in children's services, children's and young adult services, and public libraries. I do teach a storytelling class, which is a communication skills class that teaches you how to get up in front of people and present engagingly. And I also teach a child development class. So you get the kind of feeling of my teaching area. My research has been fairly varied. I have done analyses of literature. So I've taken children's books and looked at those as data. My most recent study, hopefully coming out here in the next month or two, is a look at a particular folktale from Hungary that has social justice implications and overtones to it. And so I researched back into the culture, Hungarian culture and the Turkish culture during the Ottoman Empire, to try and figure out how does this particular story represent for Hungarians the voice of the Hungarian people. And it was fascinating. And I enlisted the help of the East European librarian to translate some Hungarian texts, and had a wonderful time just digging into this one particular folktale to try and figure out what was it really saying, and what were the metaphors, and what were the cultural allusions in the story. So that was one. I've done some research with storytelling as well. I used to go into classrooms at one of the local elementary schools every week and tell a story to the first graders. And then we did a research study to see how or whether the storytelling intervention would affect the circulation of the books that I was telling. And we actually found that there was about a 300% increase in the circulation of the books that we told in those classes. And the kids loved them. They loved the storytelling, and then they would bring the book to me the next time I showed up in class and say, "I've got the book you told. I've got the book." And I have no idea whether they read it or not, but they had this real sense of engagement and ownership in it. So let me tell you briefly here, I've got about a minute left. Let me tell you quickly about this thing behind me, this Story Squad initiative. Story Squad is an initiative, an engagement and outreach initiative that we have going here at SILS, that I take the students in my storytelling class out into the community and we perform. And we have some gigs that we've been doing for over 20 years. And this year is going to be perhaps a little different because in-person get-togethers are not as easy. So we're looking at some virtual options there as well. But it's an attempt really to get folk tales and storytelling back into the schools, back into the hospitals, into community organizations, anywhere we can get invited to go, so that people hear these wonderful ancient folk tales and begin to integrate them back into their lives. So I'm going to stop with that and say thank you for listening, and I look forward to seeing you again.